Imagine if you could speak a language where you see the world alive around you. Every description, everything you see, everything you look at, everything you sense is described via the language as an action.
Language is very important to civilization, but can a culture survive without their native language? I've talked to people who are academically and personally involved with endangered languages to find out. Have explored the reasons a culture may shift to another language, what a displacement of people could do to a culture, and how language makes an impact on the way people see the world. Lenore Grenoble is a linguistics professor at the University of Chicago. She has worked with endangered languages and has done fieldwork in Siberia with Evenki and in Greenland with Kalahesut people. I talked to Lenore about why there are endangered languages and why there is such a rapid language shift.
What we're seeing right now on a global level is rapid language shift over the course of a generation. It used to be historically much more gradual, but now with so many people getting formal schooling, if you go into the school, you have to get your education in the language that's used in the school, right? So that's one way. And even places where you don't have formal education going on, there's social pressures to learn a language. If you need to trade with somebody, there's people are generally living in some sort of hierarchical structure, right? With a dominant group or a group with more power or more prestige or more money. Those all can be the same thing or they can be different. And people who want to trade with them, negotiate with them. There can also be not so hierarchical, but just, groups on the same level, but where they want to have trade across groups, and they learn at least enough of the other language to be able to negotiate those trades. So it happens in different ways, but I think if you started looking into endangered languages, which you'd see the thing that has linguists alarmed, I don't think that's too strong a word, is how rapidly shift is going on now, like we've never seen it before, because of formal education, because of government situations.
So they're learning, for example, English, and then all of a sudden English is the language that they're speaking.
Right. So you have a generation of kids.
And then why would they speak the other language if they're speaking English? Yeah.
And that's a really good question. And a lot of English speakers can't understand, monolingual English speakers can't understand why people would go back and try to learn their heritage language.
Well, it's their heritage, right? It's their culture.
It's really important.
Because I feel like if there are so many things in the culture that maybe can't be translated into English, and then so what do you do? Does it just die out? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a deep part of identity. So a lot of communities that have lost their language talk about it as a real loss and a loss of identity and try to get it back.
Yeah. Ross Perlin is a linguist from New York and works at the Endangered Language Alliance. He and I talked about how the loss of the Yiddish language has affected Jewish culture.
So Yiddish embodied the culture of Eastern European Jews, and so Yiddish speakers, like speakers of many languages, were always very multilingual. Yiddish speakers, very, very often, certainly by the late 19th, early 20th century, spoke Polish, Russian. When they, those who went to Palestine and Israel, that they, were speaking Hebrew. Those who came to the U.S. were speaking English. So they were always very multilingual. But Yiddish was the mother tongue and the sort of the carrier of Eastern European Ashkenazi Jewish culture, well into the 20th century. But with the loss of that, as a mother tongue, basically you have a kind of splintering of what was once this, as I say, kind of Eastern European Ashkenazi Jewish culture could be talked about sort of as a unit, and now really you have instead these kind of descendant cultures almost. The culture of American Jews, the culture of Israeli Jews. In the case of American Jews, something like 90% are the descendants of Eastern European Ashkenazi Jews. In the case of Israel, it would be more like 50%. Argentine Jews, the majority of whom are also, descendants of this. And so you have kind of essentially cultural change and cultural, the loss really of that original cultural unit, and it's splintering into many smaller and perhaps even more precarious and thinner descendant cultures.
Over time, as the culture and the Yiddish people moved around, the language changed.
Yiddish has had a kind of a documented thousand-year history that there's documentation for, that there are written sources, and you can see the changes in the language over time basically are tracking and are closely connected to changes in the culture of the people who are speaking it. So when they moved further into Eastern Europe, they took on more words from their neighbors in Eastern Europe, people who spoke Polish and Ukrainian, for instance. And so as their culture was being influenced by different neighbors, as they were encountering different situations, different natural environments, and so on, the language was changing along with the changes in their culture.
Terry Strauss worked at Nace College in Chicago for many years as the head of the school and as a professor. She believes that language influences thought and culture, an idea known as the Whorf-Sapir hypothesis.
The whole notion of power, the whole notion of what animates something, what's living and what isn't, how the world gets divided, the primacy of nouns over relationships and actions, and the respect for other people, the other before you. Those are all cultures. A Hopi example, writing about tense, really the tenses are something that you know for sure versus something that's not yet known. And so the Hopi have yet another tense that says something I heard from someone, so I'm not sure about.
Oh, yeah.
Those kinds of examples, again, give you a perspective on what you're hearing.
Yeah, and then also like on their culture, like, okay, something you haven't heard yet.
What's in the Hopi is if you see it yourself, then there's one tense. And if you don't, if you've been told it, then it's another tense. We don't have that in English. So that's a different, perspective as well. You have to think of most of the nouns in Ojibwe language as gerunds, but even those nouns, when there is a noun, subject and object, all those nouns are divided into two genders. And gender's familiar if you've studied French or Spanish or whatever. You know that we have masculine and feminine genders, which don't mean a heck of a lot anymore. Because they meant something in the past. In Algonquian, including Ojibwe languages, the difference is this, it's called animate, is this an animate object? Or is this an inanimate object? Is it a table or a girl? But then there's some unusual things, because if I have some special experience right here at this table, then this table may be powerful to me in some way.
So it will
shift over to animate. I may speak about it differently from you then. If you didn't have that experience. There's a whole concept of power that runs through Ojibwe culture and other Algonquian cultures that informs that, that makes that make sense.
The language really influences the way people see the world. I think that without the language, the culture will be very different because they see the world differently than the people before them. Nicole Perry is now a senior in high school. She lives on the Flathead Reservation in Arley, Montana, and grew up learning the Salish language at Nunkusum Salish Immersion School. She is very passionate about the Salish culture and the language.
And throughout my years of going there, we made it a goal to speak the language every single day, like in our classroom, when we eat lunch, out on the playground. And not only would we learn the language, but we would do a bunch of cultural activities where we would go dig medicinal plants for like medicines, and go gather food like bitterroot and camas bulbs and stuff like that. Yeah. Well, just like for me, like speaking for myself, like a big part of my identity is my culture.
Yeah.
Like I'm really intact with it.
Cole believes that without the language, the culture will not withstand. If people stop speaking the language, what do you think will happen to the culture?
That's kind of a hard one because there's like a lot of different perspectives on that. But for me, I think the culture will, I think it'll eventually die out. Because, I mean, a long time ago, when they gave us the reservations, when they put us on the reservation, they keep preserving our culture. And so these reservations, they were kind of, I feel like it was a good deal in the sense that it gives us a chance to keep our culture alive, even though they tried really hard to do all these things to kill it. And I think if we stop speaking the language, then, the government will be like, well, hey, then we'll just take away your reservations because you're not really doing anything.
I have come to the conclusion that language is essential to culture. If the native language of a culture is no longer spoken, the culture changes dramatically and can even die out.
When you have the endangerment of a language, you also have the endangerment of a lot of cultural forms that the language carries with it. So that can include things like songs and poetry and folklore. These things that are very much part of the whole cultural heritage of a group of people. As the language goes, in some cases, some of those things will hang on longer. In some cases, people continue to sing the songs even after songs in the language, traditional songs, even after they're not speaking the language. But in many cases, as the language is disappearing, the wider culture is also disappearing.